And all good. Cool. So let's
Awesome.
go ahead and get started. Well, welcome everyone. Today with me, I have Steven Ziehler with Remax Alliance in Dayton, Ohio. So Steven, how are you doing today? How are you handling all this craziness?
Doing all right. We're taking it all in stride. Things are changing day by day, and it's been a little nuts, but we're handling as best we can.
Yeah. Well, tell everyone a little bit of how long you've been doing real estate. How many families did you help this past year?
Sure. So I've been in the real estate business since 2004. I got started here at Remax. I've been here this whole time as an assistant back in 2004. I've helped hundreds of families since being in the real estate business. I was licensed, believe it or not, in 2009 when things were really bad.
Yeah.
So I got to see things, 4, 5, and 6 leading up to the crash, 7, 8, 9, 10 into 12 as things were kind of really bad, and we were seeing a lot of struggles there with homeowners and with buyers. And then as it's gotten a heck of a lot better these last several years. So I've been in it for a while, and I've kind of seen it all. So kind of what we're seeing here isn't anything really new. It's different than where we were before. But I think that we're going to be able to handle this without any kind of problem.
Yeah. And I think those two things show a lot about the consistency of your character too, that I've noticed, is the fact that, you've been at one real estate company for so long, which is, if you look at agents and loan officers, just jumping to different companies each year as a new company.
Yeah.
The fact that you've been in one place for so long and have seen the market from so many different angles, whether it's been good or bad, especially when you go through something like 2008 housing crash, I think talks a lot about the character that you bring to the table in the way that you help clients. I think shows just tremendous respect for the people that you work with and consistency through everything that you're doing. So I think that's fantastic. And obviously we've worked together, and I've enjoyed working with you.
Well, thanks. I'm going to have a hard time getting my head out of this room when we're done.
Yeah. See if that door can fit.
Yeah.
So the big question that a lot of people have is, we're in the spring market. So normally we would expect, hey, this is a great time to purchase. But now we're seeing, COVID-19 happening. This big pandemic is now changing the purchasing market. So how are you seeing this pandemic changing? And what do you think just overall what this market looks like for a buyer?
Sure. Well, it hasn't really changed. If you look at the numbers, it hasn't really changed. If you look at the year over year, it's a typical spring market by the numbers. It really is. We have all of this going on in the world, but here locally, the numbers really haven't shown much of a decline or slowdown or reduction in prices, really. I mean, some fewer homes are coming on the market, but they're still being listed each week. I've been doing weekly a market update for the Dayton area, and from the last 3 weeks, there's been a steady incline, actually, in homes that are being listed. So homes are still being put on the market. Some sellers are taking their places off the market. I think the stat was like somewhere around 20% nationally are taking their homes off the market because of the fear of coronavirus. And that's understandable. My suggestion, my recommendation for all of my clients, whether they be buyers or sellers, is if you don't have to move right now, stay put and window shop, or if you're a seller, finish those last minute projects that you were planning on doing anyways. So if you had plans to move and you weren't in a real big hurry, but you were planning on doing it, sometime this spring or summer, or maybe later in the fall, first of all, move your timelines up a little bit if you can, because we don't really know what's going to happen. And then secondly, if you're a seller, take this time that you're at home and finish some of those projects. So painting, cleaning, packing up boxes. But the main thing is that our client's safety is priority number one, first and foremost. So if you're a seller, it's understandable that you don't want a bunch of people that you don't know coming through your property, touching surfaces, opening doors, flipping light switches, and things like that. And I totally understand, where a lot of our seller clients are coming from. And then, like I said, if they don't have to move, I recommend just staying put and getting the house ready for when the time comes. Buyers are seeing a little bit different stories. So if they need to buy a place, they're still out buying. What we've seen is that the looky-loo type buyers are kind of staying home, and the ones that are serious and that need to buy and that are qualified to buy are still out buying. Just to give you an example, last weekend I was out with a buyer, and we kind of thought that we'd sort of have an easy pickings of the places that we were looking at, and the one that he actually ended up writing an offer on, and he got it actually. We were in competition with 4 other buyers for that property.
Yeah.
So it's still a seller's market for sure. I mean, we still have low inventory. There's still buyer demand out there, but with everything going on, I mean, it's fairly uncertain what's going to happen here in the next few months. But we're still seeing some deals to be had out there for buyers. And as long as you're qualified and you're ready to go, you can still make something happen here in the springtime market.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's crazy that we went out of pretty much all last year was the seller's market. And we're still seeing those numbers being crazy strong, where we're seeing those multiple offer situations where there's not a lot of homes available. Multiple buyers are bidding on the same property. What expectation should you expect as a buyer going into wanting to write an offer on a home, right? If I know that it's a competitive market and I want to put an offer in, what things do I need to make sure that I have in place to make sure my offer is attractive and is going to stand out amongst all these other bids?
Sure. Well, the first thing that we always do is arm our clients, whether they're a buyer or seller, with as much information as they can. Information is power. So what that means for a buyer is that you want to know what that local market is doing. So if you're looking at a home in a particular neighborhood, your agent is going to run a CMA for you and show you what the homes are selling for in that market.
Yeah.
You can expect, and it's been this way for years, you can expect that with the low inventory, the low number of homes that are available right now, that there are going to be multiple offers on that house. One trick that we have used, well, there are a couple different ones, but I'll talk about 2 main ones here. One thing that we've used that has worked quite well is an offer letter that we have our buyers write to the seller of whoever they're writing this offer for. And so, for example, I had a couple doctors, they were a young couple coming into town. They really loved this house and they knew that it was going to be a popular house. So what they did is write a letter to the seller explaining who they were, what they love about this person's house, that they're looking forward to moving into the area, and they love how they've taken care of this property, and they look forward to doing the same, raising their kids and doing everything else. And we found that that personal touch really helps sway that seller sometimes, in the right direction. The other thing that we use, and this gets a little bit more technical, is an escalation clause. So if we know that there's going to be competition for this property, one thing that you can write into your contract is an escalation clause that basically says, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we're going to offer you this price for the property. And then for every subsequent offer that comes in, we'll beat it by a certain dollar amount, whether it be $1,000, $2,000, or whatever it is. So whatever the next highest bid is, we'll beat it by that amount. And sometimes, of course, you put a max bid on that, but sometimes that works out too. And it's one of those things that's sort of a safeguard, but it gives you a little bit of an edge, over other buyers. So those are 2 tips that I would give buyers, especially in this market.
Yeah, those are fantastic, because I feel like so many agents do not use either of those. I don't know if some agents even know about an escalation clause, because I feel like I only hear some people talk about it. And then whenever they say they're going to put in an escalation clause, they always end up winning that bid. So how often should you kind of pull out the stops on a contract like this? If I was going to put something in, do I need an offer letter and an escalation clause, and I need to set up my contract in a really aggressive way, or is that up to the judgment of the realtor?
Well, we'll be able to know based on how long that property's been on the market, what it looks like inside. If it's one of these properties that's in really great condition and we know it's going to sell fast, and that's one of the things you really need to trust your agent on. So when we go into these properties and they look like a model home, right, and there's nothing to do but place your furniture, we know that in this market, it's going to sell within the first day or first couple days. If you're going into a property that's sort of fixer-upper and it's been on the market for a while and we can tell it's maybe a little overpriced, then we can be a little bit more aggressive with our offer, as far as trying to get a little bit better deal. But if it's one of those things that you're going to be in competition for, an offer letter is an easy fix. So it's an easy way to gain an advantage over the other buyers you're in competition for. to write a letter to a seller will take you 10 minutes maybe, and it can make all the difference in the world. An escalation clause, again, is one of those things where you kind of have to read the tea leaves a little bit and determine if that property is going to be really popular. And if you're going to be in competition with a handful of buyers, I wouldn't hesitate to put that in there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it's if I can explain a little bit about what an escalation clause is like that most people will understand.
Yeah.
If you've ever used eBay, right, and you put in a max bid on eBay, it's kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
So you'll beat the next lowest bidder by a certain amount up until you get to your max, and then you stop. So it gives you a little bit of a safeguard there, but it also helps you gain a little bit of an automatic advantage over everybody else. So that's the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to, I've never even thought about that. Anytime I've done something on eBay, I feel like I have it until the last minute and then somebody comes out of nowhere.
Sure.
But the escalation clause isn't like that. It helps make sure that you stagger that offer so that you can beat it out without always having to submit a new offer each time.
Right.
And I think that offer letter is huge too, because a seller is either seeing the contracts that are coming in when you offer, when you put in a bid, or the realtor is presenting these offers. And the problem is it's a black and white contract. It's multiple pages, has a bunch of numbers and legal language in it. It's the most offensive thing to get coming in your email. So, you're taking this black and white document and elevating it by adding a touch of emotion and a story to it. So a seller can actually see, this home that they've spent years in, creating all these memories and history and nostalgia is going to be passed on to somebody who's going to take care of it. I think is huge. And like you mentioned, it's like 10 minutes to write an offer letter.
Yeah. It's easy. And I'm glad that you mentioned the word emotion, because in this industry, whether you're a buyer or a seller, there's so much emotion involved, and it plays such a huge part of buying and selling a home. And like you mentioned, family might have raised their kids there. They have such a strong emotional attachment, and they want to know that it's going to the right person. And writing an offer letter is an easy way to add just that ounce of humanity to the black and white document that you just sent them. And a lot of times it really helps.
Yeah. So what are some wins that you're seeing with buyers? Like, obviously there's a ton of negative news going on here, where we see people are losing out on offers, or homes are expensive, cost of rent is expensive. What are some wins that you're seeing with your buyers in the past couple months?
Yeah, so homes are expensive. I mean, prices have steadily been rising for the past several years. What's great news for buyers right now is that money's still cheap. Interest rates are still incredibly low. I mean, compared to when I got in the business, we're talking about half of what they were back then. So when I got in the business, they were in that like 6.5% to 7%. Before that, I can remember when they were in the 9% type price range.
Yeah.
So even if they're fluctuating a little bit right now, even if somebody gets stuck with like a 3.75% interest rate, that's still not bad news. It's still a great thing, and they should take advantage of that. So money's still cheap. We're seeing folks win with those offer letters, that's for sure. And while there's low inventory, there aren't many homes for sale. What we're seeing now is a little bit of uncertainty coming into the next few months, because nobody really knows what's going to happen. And so that uncertainty can help a buyer out, especially with everything going on right now. So, for example, as we go through the weeks here, getting closer to when the experts are telling us that all of this is going to peak, we have businesses that are shut down. We have all kinds of craziness going on. Sellers are getting nervous too, and rightfully so. So if you're in a situation as a buyer where maybe the deal may be marginal, to go into your favor, sellers are wanting to make a deal too. So we're able to make a deal on price in a lot of cases, on terms in a lot of cases. One of the things that we see a lot with especially first-time buyers is that they're short on cash, right? So they're going to have closing costs that need to be paid out of pocket. And so a lot of times what we can manage is to have that seller help you out a little bit on closing costs, where traditionally maybe in these last few years they wouldn't. But everybody needs to get it done these days. So that's one of the things that we're seeing a lot is that sellers are making more concession on closing costs or repairs and that kind of thing too.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think it's easy when in real estate and in any negotiation to feel like we're in opposition with other people, right? It's we want our thing, and for us to get what we want means that they have to lose.
Sure.
And so, but what ends up happening with real estate is we all want the same thing. We all want to close on a home, right? A seller wants to sell,
Yeah.
buyers want to buy, realtors want to help sell and buy. Same with lenders. Everyone wants the deal to close. So
Sure.
when we come into it with this combative mentality of we're against each other, creates a lot more friction than saying, hey, what if I took a second to empathize a little bit and see what does everybody want to get done in this deal? And I think what often happens sometimes in a buyer's mindset is we don't think about what the seller's wanting.
Right.
And not that we want to give them everything and give up things on our own, but sometimes if we consider what their mindset is like, it can help us set up our offer differently. So what do you think a buyer would need to know about a seller's mentality, and what are the things running through a seller's mind that could help a buyer structure their offer a little bit differently?
Sure. So anytime I help a buyer fill out a purchase contract, whether it's the contract itself or whether we're requesting repairs or anything like that, I always tell them to keep in mind that there's another person on the other end of this contract, right? So we want to keep in mind what their thoughts are, what their mentality is, and maybe what they're going through. There's no way to know what a seller will do for you, but we need to make sure that we're reasonable and that we're not shooting for the moon here, because especially with how our market's been tilted in the seller's favor these past several years, they could very likely just say no.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that your name is on this contract, right? So if you submit something and it's insulting, and they just reject you, if you submit another one, they're going to know that you're the same person. So what I always try to communicate to my buyers is, let's keep in mind what the seller's bottom line is and what you're really asking for. So when we start talking about price and then asking for a closing cost contribution and the whole list of concessions that typically go into a purchase contract, I know this gets off in the weeds a little bit, but like home warranty issues, title insurance, tax proration, all of that stuff is just a negative for the seller's bottom line. So let's keep in mind what that really is. So we can structure our contracts to both get you what's going to be most beneficial for you, but also make it worthwhile for the seller to sell it to you. So no seller wants to feel like they're getting taken advantage of on all of these concessions, because closing costs can get, fairly expensive. So for most buyers these days, that cash out of pocket or that cash to close is very important. So if we can get some help from the seller on that, it makes things a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So we can play with the price a little bit. And I always tell people, your cash out of pocket is going to sting now. But if we increase the price a little bit, you get to pay that off over the next 30 years.
Sure. Yeah.
So a $5,000 increase over the next 30 years isn't going to mean more than a couple cups of coffee each week through the month for you. But your cash out of pocket is what's going to sting you. So we want to keep that stuff in mind when we craft these contracts.
Absolutely. And where are you seeing home values going over the next couple months? I mean, obviously, if any of us could predict what it looks like, we'd be in a pretty good financial situation. But
sure.
How are you feeling like the market's trending? Obviously, we've been seeing home values trending upwards in the past few months. Do you think that that's going to continue?
I don't think we're going to see as big of a decline as most people say we are. And I know this might be unpopular and kind of against the grain of what a lot of realtors are saying right now, but I don't think that we're going to see as much of a dip or recession as far as the housing market is concerned as most people think. It's not like 2008 for a lot of different reasons, and one of those is we don't have a surplus of homes available right now like we did back then. We actually have a shortage, and we have had a shortage for several years. Interest rates are way lower than they were back then. Lending practices have also tightened up a little bit. Not a little bit, they've tightened up a lot since 2004, 5, 6, going into 7. And also we have a lower amount of higher equity, I guess how I should put it. But folks are dealing with a little bit higher equity in their properties than they were back in 2008. Back prior to 2008, folks were taking money out of their houses left and right to buy jet skis and cars and all kinds of stuff, and they didn't have that equity saved up. They were taking it all out. And right now we have kind of the opposite problem. So I don't think we're going to have, for those reasons, I don't think we're going to have as much of a decline as a lot of people think. But, like I said, money's still cheap, interest rates are still great, and inventory is still low. So I don't think home values are going to dip. I mean, I think they probably will here a little bit over the next few months. The experts are saying this is all going to peak mid-year, but I think right when we come out of this, demand's going to be right back where it was, if not more.
Yeah.
Depending on what happens with lending practices and the mortgage industry, I think we'll be just fine as we come out of this. But probably to answer your question a little bit more directly, I think that we've got a window here for buyers to get a good deal on a property. And I think we also have a window for sellers. I think it's closing a little bit to maximize their profits from their homes. So, if I'm a seller, if I have plans on selling, I'm probably going to be selling right about now. But I think here in the next couple months will be a good opportunity for buyers to take advantage of everything that's going on.
Yeah. And I think you bring up some good points too about anybody who's saying that the market's going to go one way or the other strongly it's all based on speculation, because all the technical indicators that we have about how strong the housing market is and how values are shifting doesn't point us in the direction of saying that home values are going to tank. So whether they do or not is completely speculative. And I think it's a little reckless when people go out and, want to pitch whatever, just, I don't know, to cause emotion or just to want to have something to say. But all these technical indicators that we have still show that this is a crazy strong seller's market. And values have not taken a dip yet. And if anything, I feel like this last week has been busier than the week before. And I'm not sure what the cause of that is, but it's when you thought everything was going to slow down a little bit, it all of a sudden feels like things are still picking up, and that competition is still driving us through the rest of this market. So what would you say as far as, should buyers wait until this virus passes and we see how this all plays out to purchase, or should we go ahead and purchase now and take advantage of the situation?
Yeah, so my advice to all my buyer clients has been the same, for the last several weeks. If you're not in a hurry to buy, if you don't absolutely need to buy something, just window shop right now. Yeah. There are so many websites out there. You got your Zillow, Trulia, Realtor.com, Remax.com, of course. There are so many photos and there's so much information about these listings out there that it's so easy to window shop and really do your homework about what's out there. Safety is number one priority. So if you don't need to be going through houses, don't. Keep everybody safe, stay indoors, window shop. If you do need to buy something, whether it's a job relocation or what have you, then definitely get out, and we've got some creative ways of showing properties and getting the deals done. But as far as whether a buyer should buy right now or not, real estate's always historically been a safe place to put your money. And especially right now with interest rates so low, I don't see any problem with buying right now. I don't think, from what I was saying previously, I don't think that the housing market and home values are going to tank like a lot of folks say they will. Yeah. Perception is reality in a lot of cases. And when you're getting, scary news from what you're seeing on TV or, your friend's aunt or whatever about the housing market, it can make people panic in a lot of cases, which is why we arm our clients with accurate information, which is why I like to give everybody the actual numbers from our local MLS on what's going on here. So if you have plans to buy and you need to buy, I wouldn't hold back in doing it. If you don't need to buy right away, I would sit back and take it easy and just window shop for now. Because again, this is changing day by day, week by week, and nobody knows what's going to happen next. And if they tell you they do, they're lying to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I will say that my extended family they're experts on real estate. The advice that they like to give me. The only word of caution I would have for people who are, if they are looking at purchasing now, is really having a solid picture of their current finances and their employment situation. Because I would hate for somebody to get into the point where they purchase a home and they're already not in a great financial position to begin with, no matter if there's a pandemic or not. If you're purchasing a home and you don't have great finances, it's not going to make your problems go away. It's actually going to magnify the problems that you already have. I like to kind of draw the comparison with, when I was in college, there's always you have like the ring by spring joke where everyone's getting engaged by spring, it seems like, of their junior or senior year. And so these people go into, they have relationships and think, well, if I get married, things going to get better. All of a sudden, everything's going to change. My relationship's going to get better. And you realize nothing actually changes afterwards. So it's the same thing with our finances. Just because we make one big decision doesn't mean that things are automatically going to change, right? Renting wasn't actually throwing away money if I was using credit cards and taking on a ton of debt and spending poorly and not budgeting. So where do I begin if I want to buy a house? Do I start looking on Zillow? That seems like the easiest place to go, or do I need to call a realtor, and how do I figure out who I'm going to work with?
Yeah, so for right now, I mean, I think the stat is 90+% of buyers who end up buying start their search online. And if you've been thinking about buying, you've most likely set up a Zillow account or account on one of those other websites. And like I said, if you don't absolutely have to buy, just window shop right now. But I'm glad you brought up the point about making sure that you're financially stable, because I know that things are going to be tightening up a lot here coming up soon in the mortgage industry with verifying employment and making sure that folks are financially sound. So this is true now as it was true years ago, that before you buy a house, you want to make sure that you can pay for it. Back in 2000, like 4, 5, and 6, we had lenders throwing mortgages at people. Not even verifying income. They were just writing them pre-approval letters over the phone, just with a verbal. And it's not that way anymore. So making sure that you're financially set is step number one. Step number two, I would recommend calling somebody like you, a home loan consultant, to talk about your options. So what mortgage product is going to be the best for your particular situation? One thing that I love about Motto Mortgage is that you guys can put together some sample loan payments and lay it out very clearly for what somebody's going to be able to afford. And that'll help you really start your game plan. It will set a price range that you'll be comfortable with. Most folks, when they're thinking about buying a house, they're probably renting at the moment, or they own a home already, which brings up 2 points. The first one is, if you're a first-time buyer and you're renting, kind of what you can afford because you're paying a monthly rental payment. And that's what a lot of folks base their initial search on. If you already own a home, you're paying a mortgage payment most likely. And a lot of folks think that just because they own a home, they can buy another one. And that's not always the case, as we found out. So, and there's so many new factors and variables, especially right now with everything going on. So my recommendation to anybody, whether you own a home or not, who's thinking about moving, buying a place, is to talk to somebody like you, Kyle, with Motto Mortgage or whoever, but talk to a home loan consultant to get a good idea of where you stand financially. Once you've established that you'll probably be able to qualify for a mortgage, then you can contact a realtor and set up a game plan. So if you need to sell your home first, we'll talk about getting that done first. If you don't have a place to sell, a lot of folks are tied into a lease agreement. So we need to set up a game plan and a roadmap on what it's going to take to get you into that home. So after you've gotten your pre-qualification done, come see me or any other of the great buyer agents that we have here at RE/MAX, and we'll get that game plan set up for you.
Yeah, that's great. I think having that plan is huge, because it can be easy to dip your toe in the water and all of a sudden get bombarded by messages. Because if you sign up for something on Zillow, you're now going to get a lot of realtors who are going to call you. Same with all these other sites. And then it can feel like you're in this whole ocean of everything getting thrown at you. So having that plan of saying, first, what do my finances look like? So I need to talk with a lender first, get all those numbers. That way I can see my rate. How much cash do I need out of pocket? What's my monthly payment going to be? What kind of options do I have? How much money can I spend? Then you can talk with a realtor and go through, hey, this is what we're looking at. We know what our numbers are. We're very confident about being able to afford this. Now we have the freedom and flexibility to actually shop and it be an enjoyable process. That way we don't
Sure.
see every home and then figure out the payment, 2 weeks later was way more than we can than we can handle.
Right.
Which is
Sure.
super fun. But a quick aside too is that so you work in the Dayton, Ohio area. So if anyone's purchasing in Dayton, Ohio, Steven's obviously the guy to go to. But you can also give referrals out through the entire nation. Is that right?
Absolutely. Anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, as a matter of fact.
Oh, cool.
We can send a referral. And so we have affiliates in every single country across the globe. So we can send out referrals wherever. Now, I've never sent one internationally, but lately a lot of clients that I have are moving to Florida. So we have contacts in Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, out to California, everywhere. So if you need a good RE/MAX agent anywhere in the country, we'll be able to hook you up with one.
That's fantastic. Cool. Well, let's jump over to some questions here. We have some lined up in the chat. So this question is a contract considered canceled if the closing date passed by but not closed yet, and no addendum to extend closing date was signed? So you want to take that?
Sure. So your contract, especially if you have a set closing date, if you're past your closing date and you haven't closed and there's no extension, technically you're out of contract. I'll tell you, and it goes back to what we were talking about before, sellers want to sell and buyers want to buy. And typically, if you've gotten to your closing date, that means that you've gone through the loan process, you've gone through inspections, you've gone through an appraisal, you've gone through title work and everything else. So there's already a long road that you've traveled. And if for some reason you don't want to close by the time your closing date rolls around, then there's something else going on. If there's not an extension signed, that means that one of the sides of that party probably doesn't want to close. But the facts are that if you get past your closing date and there's no extension, you're technically out of contract. So if there's other provisions in there that you have that address that, then those would probably apply. But if not, then yeah, you're out of contract.
Yeah. And I think you're so right about everybody wants the same thing. Everybody really wants to close. I have yet,
especially by that point. Yeah.
Yeah. I have yet to see the point in which you get up to a contract and then, you're about to that contract date and somebody doesn't extend the contract. And sometimes what I've seen happen is, you get out of the contract date and then an addendum gets written later. Is that the safest way to operate? Probably not, because you're kind of in some pretty bad territory until you have that addendum locked in. But I have yet to see a seller who actually walks away from a deal, because at that point they've probably been stringed along on this process for 30 to 45 days, hopefully not longer. And they're very eager to say, what's another week? If we need another week, let's get it wrapped up. Right. Otherwise they have to start from the beginning, unless they get, something like cash that comes in.
Sure.
Cool. Well, I think I can answer this question a little bit. So would a lender rather see a buyer with very little cash, but little or no credit debt, or a buyer with more cash, 10 to 20,000, but also comparable credit debt? That's a great question. Honestly, a lender doesn't really think in those kind of terms. They don't really think in the either or terms necessarily about how much money you have or how much debt you have. It's mainly going to come down to number one, can you afford the cash to close? So if your cash to close, which is your down payment plus closing costs minus credits, is $5,000, then you need $5,000 in the bank. And then as far as your credit, they want to see a good debt to income ratio. So I have a couple videos on debt to income ratios and how to figure out what yours is, along with what the debt to income ratio requirements are for all different types of loans. So what I think I would lean more towards a buyer being more qualified if they had more cash and if they had a higher debt, actually, than a buyer with little cash and little debt. But both could go either way depending on what income looks like, what credit score looks like, and everything like that. So ultimately, as long as you meet the debt to income ratios and you have the cash to be able to close, you should be pretty solid to get that wrapped up. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say so. If I could touch on that just real quick. Yeah. If you're looking to buy a house and you don't have much cash, keep in mind that home ownership, it can get expensive. I mean, there are expenses that buyers don't necessarily think about when they're buying a home. So keep in mind that you're going to have to fix things around that house, as they break down. If you've got a water heater or other mechanical systems, yard maintenance, things like that, that you'll need to fix at some point. So just keep that in mind when you're buying a house, that if you're very, very short on cash, it might not be the best thing for you. But it's all part of budgeting and making sure that you're on that strong financial footing before you get into it.
Yeah. So we got a follow-up comment that says, you have a family member who wants to gift a down payment to someone. When is this a problem for a lender? So down payment gifts are perfect. That's completely acceptable to a lender. All you'll have to do is just document that, and the lender will help you. So they'll have you write a gift letter that basically says the family member is giving that to you with no expectation of repayment. They'll also want to prove what family member it came from, and prove that it's in your bank account too. But I think what Stephen brought up was an awesome point about, owning a home has a lot of surprise expenses sometimes. And if we don't have the cash to begin with a down payment, then I would want to make sure, do I have money set aside to be able to pay for when something happens, like the furnace goes out? Or, I had a buyer who closed on a deal a couple months ago, and the day he moved in, he has a really expensive gas leak. Like, there's nothing that can be changed about that. You close on the home, you can't go back to the seller and say, wait a second, we need this fixed after the fact. So I think that's huge, being able to have those funds set aside, and whether that looks like an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of expenses for you and your family, or whether you have a separate maintenance fund for your home. Having money after you close on your home so you don't drain your bank account and then go into owning a home with $0, I think is huge, and will really set you up for success and some sanity at the same point.
Yeah, and you also need to be able to feed yourself and your family if you have one.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind too.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, Stephen, thanks so much. I really appreciate your insight here. And seriously, if you're interested in working with a realtor, Stephen is going to be fantastic for you. He can give you a great recommendation as well. Again, like I said in the beginning, I think, to me, you're one of the most respected agents, just because of the care that you have for clients. There are a lot of people in real estate who don't show a lot of care and empathy. And I think that those are the two qualities that you demonstrate the most with your clients and with the work that you do, and treating everybody fairly, even when things can get really frustrating and tough and all these situations come up. So I really appreciate how you handle working through this business that can be so chaotic all the time.
Well, thank you, Kyle. I appreciate the kind words, and I appreciate you having me on today. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to do it again soon, but you stay safe and well, and I'll talk with you soon, okay?
Sounds great. You too.
All right.